Hi to everyone. It's great to see you. And as Alan said at the start, please do get busy on that chat function, and ask any questions that you want. And then I think Galina is going to take us through that at the end. So let me get my slides ready for you. And if you could perhaps give me a thumbs up, because I can see you in my screen that you can see that. Okay, that would be good.
Yeah, it's
perfect. Let me just get slideshow.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Teresa.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So, well, thank you very much for inviting me. My name's Teresa Swinton, and I'm the founding director of Paradigm Human Performance. And actually, really exciting time for us. Next month in March, my business Paradigm is actually 5 years old. It's our 5th birthday, which is considering, I think, the few years that we've all been through as business and small organizations and bigger organizations. It's quite an achievement to still be here after 5 years. So I'm really pleased about that, and have seen my business and certainly my clients' organizations go through considerable change. So what does Paradigm do? Well, it kind of does what we say on the tin. We look at this science called human and organizational performance, but also what we do is we kind of broaden that. So we recognize that organizations can set their people up for optimal performance, but also, and quite often, they actually don't do that. They set them up to fail, often unwittingly and unknowingly, through the processes, through the culture, through the leadership style, all these things that inevitably lead to mixed communications and misinterpretations at what we call the coalface, where work gets done. So yes, we look at human and organizational performance improvement that you will have heard of from the likes of Todd Conklin and Sidney Dekker, etc., etc. But also we look at health and well-being, mental health and well-being, and safety culture and leadership culture, leadership development. So a broad range of how can we optimize human performance within the organizational setting. As you can see there, late last year, we added on this lovely little tag onto the end of our name, which is plus Shane Bush. So Shane is a mentor of mine and has been for the last 11 years since we first met. We had the honour last year of joining forces, and Shane Bush and Paradigm are now one and the same organisation, which is really exciting. So that's just a little bit about us. In terms of what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight, we're going to be starting with trust and how to make a silent organisation talk. And this is something that is a real underpinning requirement for any organisation that's looking to do any kind of improvement. And we tend to miss this at the start. So when organisations start to think about transformational change, culture transformation, those kind of things, they very often kind of dive straight into the doing without laying the foundations that are required, and then get so far down the road and wonder why the workers are still doing what the workers have always done, why we're not achieving the success or hitting our mile markers, or why the ship isn't turning around as quickly as we had hoped it would. And so very often what we end up doing is talking to leadership teams and organizations and saying, look, we need to get back to first principles here. Let's go straight back to the basics and understand that we have to, any change that we make in our organizations really are dependent upon trust. The trust that the workforce have in the leadership team, and also the trust that the leadership team actually have in the workforce. And so that's what I'm going to be giving you today. My mission in my business at Paradigm really is to kind of simplify the theory and the academia. So I read lots of books, and I know that all of you do as well. And sometimes I read a book and I get to the end of it and I think, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to interpret that and turn it into tools in my organization. And that was really where I started with human performance. I went on a course to learn about it and came back really infused, but kind of scratching my head and thinking, so how do I make this happen? You know, it sounds great in theory, the principles I really align to, and I love how this sounds, but how do I make this work? So what I did in the organization that I worked with at the time, I devoured the books and the manuals that everything I could come across, devoured it, and started through trial and error, implementing sort of micro experiments, mini experiments, and just trying some of this stuff and learning what worked, and importantly, what didn't work, learning from those failures and then improving on them to move forward. So what I'm going to share with you this evening are things, very, very simple starting blocks that we talk about when we work with organizations and leaders, about how to start with trust and to try and get your organization, you know, talking and sharing the information with you. So what is psychological safety? There are lots of definitions. This is just one, and I guess it's probably one of the most believable ones because it's from Amy Edmondson. Psychological safety is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up. And that's with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Now, it doesn't really matter what any definition of psychological safety is, except yours. It is really important that you, in your own organizations, define psychological safety on your terms, because there is so many misinterpretations of it out there. So for example, I've had organizations who have asked us to sell them psychological safety. Is this a product you can sell us? Can we buy it? We've had somebody asked us to go and deliver a talk on psychological safety at an event. And when we delivered our talk, there was a bit of confusion in the room. And afterwards, they told us that they thought psychological safety was actually about mental ill health and resilience. And they couldn't understand why we started talking about speaking up and leaders' trust and so on and so forth. So as much as in the safety world, we might think that we have a really good understanding of the definition of psychological safety, that isn't always the case. So, you know, a great starting point, sit down with your leaders, your leadership team and your exec team and say, what do we think psychological safety means? And how are we going to define it in our context of our organization? And don't read a book first, you know, just kind of internalize what it means to you. Because if as a leadership team, you can't go out there to your workforce and kind of, you know, converse with them and share what this is, then it won't be believable. So that's a really great starting point to come up with your definition of psychological safety and how that's going to look and feel in your organization. If you don't really know how to do that, then just keep it very simple and ask yourself questions. So, you know, things like, what would it look like around here? What would it sound like around here? And what would it feel like to work here if this was a psychologically safe environment? Would I behave differently? How would we behave differently as a leadership team? So those are some really good questions to get you thinking about what the change is going to be and how you'll know when you've achieved that change. Why is it important? So if you look at the general sort of concept of psychological safety as it's kind of widely understood, you can achieve some or all of these things through improving the level of psychological safety in your organization. So improved employee engagement and well-being, more collaboration and knowledge sharing, and that's something that is extremely important, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. Better problem solving, and you know, because obviously what happens when you've got a psychologically safe environment where people do feel empowered to speak up, then actually we can really get a better understanding of the things that are causing us problems. So many times I work with organizations and they tell me that they've got initiatives going on to solve problems. So this is the problem that we're having, and we've developed this initiative to address it. But when I start to look and understand that organization, what I very quickly determine is that they're actually trying to solve symptoms of a deeper underlying problem. Now, I'm sure that this is something that the majority of you as health and safety practitioners, you'll be more than familiar with. But sometimes it's more seductive and more easy for us to fix a symptom. Because if we really want to do that root cause analysis and get down to the causal factors and really deal with causes, sometimes that can feel like it's too big for us, or it's out of reach, or it's beyond us. So better problem solving does come along with psychological safety, as long as you've got this environment where we really have done our root cause analysis and we understand what the problems are. It creates a space for diverse and inclusive conversations. And again, we'll come back to this because I'm really interested in learning from you tonight as well, in terms of how you feel your organizations are doing on this diversity and inclusivity piece. Because from my perspective at Paradigm, we're struggling with it a little bit, and some of our clients are struggling with this. So I'm quite interested in hearing your perspectives of this as well tonight. But if you have got a diverse or inclusive workforce, then yeah, if it goes without saying that if you've got an environment where people can speak up openly without any fear of retribution, then that should hopefully open up these conversations as well. Higher staff retention, again, goes along hand in hand with the trust and the clarity of vision and mission and role and responsibilities, which also come out of this kind of an environment. So yeah, we hold on to our staff for longer. The converse of this actually is really interesting as well. So sometimes we lose staff as we start to create this psychologically safe environment. And that's not so much of a challenge for an organization as opposed to a realization that sometimes some types and some quarters of our workforce don't want to be in an environment where there's an expectation on them to speak up and share and raise concerns. And so sometimes you might find when you start off down this journey that you may lose people from your organization because it's not in their DNA to kind of have this kind of environment and this culture where that expectation is placed upon them. And that's the other sort of end of the spectrum when it comes to psychological safety. This not only ability to speak up and be heard, actually, when you go to the far extreme of it, actually it's an expectation that's placed upon people that you will speak up, and it will be unacceptable for you to not speak up. So again, finding that balance is going to be important as well. High performing teams and employees who are more adaptable to change. Well, I would caveat that last one by saying, as long as change is managed well within the organization, most employees are already adaptable to change. We live with it day in, day out. The resistance comes when, as leaders and as leadership teams, we don't manage change particularly well, and that's quite common. So all sounds great, yeah, and of course, I'm sure you're all thinking, well, yeah, we want all of those things. But my question is, and I just really want to kind of take a breather and say, do we really? Is our organization ready to change? Is it really ready to do the things that are required in order to create this environment? And again, as part of the planning for this, what I would really encourage you to do is have those really difficult conversations behind closed doors as a leadership team. Say, what is going to happen when our people do start talking to us? What's going to happen when they start telling us what it's really like to work around here? What it's really like to work for us as a leadership team? How we behave in their eyes when we go to work as the leaders of this organization. And so there is some prep to do before we just go after this mythical thing and we start to put these foundations in place that, you know, we tell people, we want you to speak up, we want you to report things, we want you to share with us, we want you to be open. We really have to hold up the mirror to ourselves as a leadership team and ask ourselves, can we do that ourselves? Can we be that with each other? We have a safe environment around the table at the top of the organization to be able to challenge each other in that safe environment. And if you don't, that's your starting place. Start there, start with you as a leadership team first, because if you can't do it, then it's unfair for you to expect your workers to do it as well. And inevitably, there will be some resistance from some parts of the leadership team. And until you've got that alignment, until everyone on that leadership team is able to have those conversations around that board table and behind those closed doors, I wouldn't even think of starting to talk to your workforce about it, because you'll look misaligned as a leadership team. I hope that makes sense. So there's a little cartoon, we all love Dilbert, I know, and I'm sure you do as well. So yeah, okay, so I'm going to share something with you. Oh well, hang on a minute, I want to get my point across first, and that's very often how we come across as leaders. So again, ask yourselves that question and really try to answer it honestly. Are we prepared to do whatever it takes? Because a lot of management teams and leaders will say, yes, of course, this is what we want. And then the minute I sit down with them and I kind of share what I've seen inside their organization, maybe they become a bit defensive and maybe they don't know how to kind of respond and react to the feedback. And that's coming from me as an external. How are they going to react when it comes from a member of their own team? So the uncomfortable truth. True psychological safety always starts at the top of the organization. It cannot start in the safety department. It can't start in, the diversity and inclusion network or the women's network. It can't start there. It can't start with one team, and it can't start down at the bottom of your organization. It can only successfully start and be sustained from the top of the organization, which is why kind of driven home that point. You as a leadership team, you have to be able to do this first. And it's not easy. To start it, leaders need to show vulnerability and trust in their people. And that alone can be quite a challenge. To be vulnerable is not an easy thing to do. Vulnerability and trust requires courage. You have to be a really brave leader to go out there and be able to face your workforce and say, I don't have all of the answers. I don't know how we're going to solve all of our problems. I don't know what the end of this is going to look like. And at this moment in time, I don't know what the whole of this journey is going to look like, but I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to rely on you to show me and to teach me and to lead me. Those are really, really difficult things for some leaders to say. And I've spent, in fact, all of my career working in quite heavy industry, male-dominated environments. And it's really, really difficult for those organizations that have come from that kind of culture where it is a bit rough and tough and we don't show our softer side, that to kind of suddenly start having these care and sharing, conversations. I love the fact that when I'm talking to organizations, they refer to them as soft skills. And it does make me smile because actually they're the hardest skills. They are the hardest skills that as an organization you can ever learn. So this idea of them being soft skills, just go into any power station. I've spent a few years working in some power stations and talk to them about soft skills. And that's when you really learn that these are actually really, they're not just hard skills. Sometimes they can feel like a dark art in themselves. So not as easy as it sounds. And it takes integrity. And where does the integrity come in? That ability to say, in the past, we knew this, and this is how we led, and this is how we managed, and this is how we ran our business. And today we know something different and we're learning something different. And therefore we recognize that as a leadership team and as an individual at the leadership table, I have to change. I have to be the catalyst for the change that I want to see in my organization. So the buck stops here. I'm going to try and make this happen. I won't always get it right. I'm going to screw this up probably many, many times, but I'm going to make it okay for you to hold me to account when I do screw up. And when I do screw up, I'm going to come and share that with you. And then we're going to learn together how we can try and reduce the likelihood of me doing that again in the future. These are not the kind of conversations that we're used to having with our leaders. And certainly we're not used to having them typically as leaders. So it really is, it kind of feels like, going in there kind of naked and really, just putting it out there and saying, I need your help to make me a better leader. But if we don't start there, no one else is going to start it for us. And the problem is, as I said, some of the environments that I've worked in, we've spent years beating all of that out of our leaders. We kind of wanted them to be the opposite of this. It's, get out there and lead, drive production, drive profitability, drive safety. Yeah, absolutely. But we didn't necessarily teach people what really does drive safe performance. What we taught people to do was measure the absence of safety. And I know that many of you on this call will be familiar with or currently exploring the new view of safety, as it's called, or maybe even human and organizational performance. If you're a Hull Nagel fan, maybe you're currently exploring or practicing safety too. All of those are great things, but remember, you're fighting the tide of an operational leadership culture where we have literally spent years teaching our operational counterparts that safety is measured in accidents and incidents and in unwanted outcomes. So as a community, as a safety community, we're being really vulnerable at the moment, and we're kind of going out and holding the mirror up to ourselves and saying, you know what, maybe some of this stuff that we measured safety by in the past, maybe some of the principles that we held dear to in the past, maybe they're shifting, maybe our understanding is shifting. So again, as a community, the health and safety community, we ourselves have to show some of that vulnerability at the moment and recognize that some of our beliefs and some of the things that we have held true to for the last however many years, those things are kind of no longer on the firm foundations that we always believed they were. So be mindful of the shadow you cast. It is a really important message. And again, this wasn't, it's not been penned by me, although it's something that I've become kind of known for since I set up Paradigm. It was actually something that I was, somebody shared this with me at the power stations that I worked in. And he had come to work with us as a projects engineer, and he brought this message with him and something that he'd learned from, people that he'd grown up with as leaders, this message of be mindful of the shadow you cast. And it really struck a chord with me because it was a bit of an eye-opener when he...
Yes, good evening. My name is Dr. Crispin Allison. I spoke with one of your colleagues this morning.
Thank you. So again, be mindful of the shadow you cast. And if you take nothing more away from my presentation this evening than this, this is such a powerful message. And it's lived out. Leaders often fail to understand the impact of their influence. And this can be particularly true of new or young leaders. So if you think back to somebody you worked for, somebody that, who was a manager or a leader to you in your sort of formative years in the workplace, somebody that you looked up to and respected, or perhaps feared and didn't respect, the impact of their influence over you, I'm sure if you think back to that, was probably significant. We all hear sayings like, well, people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. And that is so true. And we as leaders have so much influence over the behaviors and the attitudes of the people that work for us. And it's not always the things that we say. Sometimes it can be the things that we do as well, and the conflict that we can bring. So how many of us are familiar with times when we've rewarded undesirable behaviors, almost inadvertently? You know, great job done at the weekend, guys. You know, we got the emergency job done. We got the, you know, complex lifting operation done this week on time. And yet the leaders, you know, so we're celebrating an outcome. We're rewarding and recognizing an outcome instead of saying, what was the process? How did we get this successful outcome? You know, and simple questions like, how many rules did we have to break or bend to get this successful outcome can often open up such a rich conversation, as long as it's done in the right way and you've got that kind of environment where those conversations can take place. So again, as leaders yourselves, and when you're talking to your operational counterparts, they're always looking for questions. You know, what can I ask? What are the things that I can go out there and kind of share with people? You know, look at the process. Are you rewarding an outcome, or are you actually rewarding the way that that outcome was achieved? And do you know? One of the organizations that I work with, and it's an amazing organization, was rewarding some work that had been done over a weekend shift. And on the Wednesday following the weekend, they received a complaint from a member of the public who also provided some CCTV footage of a particular activity that took place. And there was a 4-hour period when a lifting operation was taking place. And to say that it was being done in a less than desirable way would be the understatement of the year. And I sat with the leadership team of this organization and watched this 4-hour long CCTV footage of a lifting operation in which how nobody was killed, including school children and infants who were passing by to go to swimming lessons and go to the local park. How nobody was killed, I will never know. And yet that organization had spent 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, celebrating, putting these individuals on a pedestal because they got the job done. Are you outcome focused, or are you looking at the process? Because that's really important. If you constantly reward the outcome without questioning or challenging the process, that's the shadow you cast. You now measure your team by outcomes, and they will go to the ends of the earth to achieve the outcome that you want. And if you never ask how, they will never tell you. So again, what are you rewarding? What behaviors, what things are you rewarding? And this lends into this thing and it's for those of you who are familiar with human performance, you'll recognize this as the sort of fourth principle of human performance. If you're not familiar with that, you can find that on the Department of Energy websites. If you Google DOE human performance manuals, you'll find the tombs that basically our whole industry is kind of, you know, based upon. They're out there free for you to get. If you want them, I can send them to you. Great sources of information and help. But this is the principle. People achieve high levels of performance based largely on encouragement and reinforcement received from leaders. And of course, the adverse of that is true. People can achieve some extraordinary feats, which are not necessarily high levels of performance. They can actually achieve some pretty low levels of performance as well, if leadership is really reinforcing that. So again, be mindful of that shadow that you cast. And again, how leaders respond matters. So if when we have those accidents and incidents in our workplace, the conversation that is going on around the safety office or the leadership office or the boardroom is, does that have to be a recordable? What sort of treatment did they give the individual at hospital? Was it something that a first aider could have given? Because if it is, we can bang that down to, you know, it doesn't have to be a RID. Or if you are even having those conversations in this day and age, then you need to get your act together, because humans are fallible. The best people make mistakes, and these things will happen. What we really need to understand is why it happened, how it happened, and what we need to do to prevent those things happening again. And you will never, ever do that if your response to the things that go wrong is, how can we close it down? How can we minimize the impact of it? And how does this affect our bonus at the end of the year? Then you're going to really struggle to create a true psychologically safe environment in your organization. So the real fundamentals are things that need to be challenged as well if we really truly want to do this. Inexperienced and untrained leaders. So I can't see you all at the moment, but you may be able to just give me a thumbs up for those of you I can see, or maybe a yay or an amen in the chat room. So how many of you work in organizations or have worked in organizations where this has happened? This guy was a great technician, a great fitter, a great brickie. Therefore, why wouldn't he or she be a great supervisor or a great leader? Yeah. So he or she was the best person on the tools. So who better to promote into the next leadership position? And then those individuals, I'm hoping that some of you, if somebody can give me a nod, if we've got some amens in the chat room, then I'm see Alan smiling there. Yeah, absolutely. They're everywhere. And unfortunately, it's a great example of setting your people up to fail. Great technicians and great, tool operatives and sharp end workers don't always make great supervisors. Go figure. And sometimes you really do need them on tools. So why would you ever move them off the tools? But we fall into this trap because we feel that the only way to reward and recognize good work is by promoting people. And then unfortunately what we do is we promote them into positions that they're not suited for. And then to kind of make it even worse, guess what? We don't train them. We don't teach them how to lead. We don't allow them to lead. And this causes us a number of problems. Those individuals usually end up managing both up and down the organization. So they're trying to manage the person who promoted them. They're trying to manage their expectations of this person thought I would be really good and they put their trust in me. Therefore, I have to prove to them that I can do it and that their trust hasn't been misplaced. But also these individuals down here who now work for me, I was one of them. And I've got a bond with them that now I've got to try and break that bond somehow. I've got to try and be different to those individuals. And I've almost got to try and forget what I actually know about them in order to manage them fairly. And that is such a tough ask. It is such a hard thing to do. And where you'll see this manifesting is inexperienced and untrained leaders. And they're not always at the bottom of the organization, dare I say it. Sometimes they're at the very top of the organization. They revert to their known strengths when the pressure is on. So again, going back to some of my industry experience, I spent 17 years working in the rail industry, and very often, and putting in sort of power systems, signaling systems, trackside substations, power distribution systems, etc., looking after oil field cable circuits. The amount of times where when something went wrong, I would see a project manager or an operations director get his overalls and his high vis on, jump in a van and go to site as soon as something went wrong. And I used to scratch my head and think, why are you doing that? Why aren't you leading? You going out there and picking up a spanner is not leading. That's you going back to what you know. That's your place of safety. Your job now is to get into the boardroom or get into the management suite and manage the thing that has gone wrong and lead your people. Trust the people that work for you to deal with the crisis. Your job is to lead in a crisis, not to go out there, pick up a spanner and fix the thing that needs fixing. So look out for those leaders in your organizations. When the pressure is on, when something's gone wrong, where do they go? Do they put on their overalls and go to the facility, or do they put on their shirt and tie and get into the management room? Do they roll up their sleeves and go and join in with the gang? Or do they stand back and say, what do I need to do? How is this impacting me as a leader and my organization? How can I lead my people so that they can solve the problems? And it's really telling. And when you find these inexperienced or untrained leaders, They go to where the job is. They go back to the sharp end because that's what they know. That's what comforts them. That's where they feel that they're in control. And that's a really important point when things are going wrong, where they feel like they can have control over something. So look out for those. They can't distance themselves from the things that they know about their former peers. And again, this leads into this thing above. So we've got a really complex job coming up, but oh my God, I know that Bob and Tina and Joe, I know what happens when we get this job comes up. They're rubbish at it because I was always the one in the team who did this. So I'll just go back out there and keep an eye on them. It's really difficult for them to distance themselves and say, no, I'm now the leader and I have to trust those individuals to crack on and get that job done for me, not with me. And when those individuals are looking to me to say, well, you always did this for us, boss. My job is to say, go and crack on and let me know if you need anything from me, not to dive in there and do it for them. So these are just little things to look for when you're looking at these leaders, because unless you work with these leaders and teach them how to lead, you can't create psychological safety around them. You just can't, because they don't have that trust and they lack the confidence in themselves to lead. They need your support and education to lead. They definitely do. Don't take somebody off the tools or assume that because they're a good supervisor, a great foreman, they're going to be a great manager. The job is so different. It really is. You know that if you're an experienced and well-trained leader. Don't drop people in at the deep end and just expect them to swim, because they won't. They will very quickly sink to the bottom, or as I've said, they'll revert back to what they know and they'll just be a glorified overpaid technician. And you will end up doing their job for them as well. And I see that an awful lot. They feel the need to prove themselves to everyone. So again, they'll be talking about how they could have done the job better, how they would have been out there and they would have done this when they used to do the job, you know. And the amount of time, if I had a quid for every time I've said to somebody, do you know what, when was the last time you did the job? Because the job's changed and people have changed and the tools have changed and the technique has changed and the technology has changed. Just because you did the job 20 years ago doesn't mean you can do that job today. And so allow your people to do the job that they're trained to do. If they're going to screw up, they're going to screw up. It doesn't need you there to kind of, you know, help them screw up. Let them go and screw up. They'll learn. Obviously, there's times when we don't want people to screw up. I understand that. But we learn through the things that we get wrong. So don't worry, kind of let them fall. When it's safe to fall, let them fall. Leaders who are trying to prove themselves to everyone are really not leading. They're just kind of showing what they're about. They don't know how to handle failure. Again, you'll see this a lot. And again, they're not just at the bottom of the organization, they're all through the organizations. Things go wrong, they might beat themselves up, they kind of, you know, scream and shout and bang the table. They don't know how to handle failure. And the great managers and the greatest leaders in our organizations are the ones that say, okay, the buck stops here. And how are we going to do, you know, what are we going to do from this point onwards? How are we going to learn from this? How are we going to, you know, prevent it from happening again? And if we can't prevent it from happening again, how are we going to reduce the consequences when it does happen again? So again, that's what good leaders do. Bad leaders or inexperienced and untrained leaders just don't know how to handle failure. And therefore what happens is they and the people that work for them, they try to hide it or they try to bury it or minimize it. So there are two types of leader primarily, and I'm generalizing, I know, but you get a mindset that is my trust is yours to earn. And then you get this other that is my trust is yours to lose. And as it says there, you can only build a psychologically safe environment from a perspective of my trust is yours to lose. As leaders and as good leaders trying to create a psychologically safe environment, you have to give your trust. That has to be the starting point. There are too many leaders out there who have this attitude with their workers that you've got to earn my trust first. And the problem is that we're so poor at setting a standard. What does good look like? We're so poor at being consistent in our leadership and in our enforcement of our standards that people don't really know what we expect of them. So therefore, they end up never actually earning our trust, or at least feeling that they've never earned our trust. So therefore, having this mindset of my trust is yours to lose is setting you and your people up for success. Now, by all means, once the trust is gone, then fine, it might be theirs to earn back. But in order for people to lose your trust, you need to be very clear on what that looks like. So what are the things that they might do that would lose your trust? That's an easier conversation to have than telling somebody how to earn your trust. Okay, so when you tell me what not to do, there's so much of it. When you tell me what you do want me to do, actually it's so much easier for me. Okay, so again, think about that dichotomy of my trust is yours to earn, my trust is yours to lose, and think about the ways that you can demonstrate the trust that you have in your workers. And something that I often say to leaders in organizations is, you know what, if you don't have that trust, there's a little secret. Fake it till you make it, okay? If it really feels uncomfortable for you to do this, fake it. Because if that's what you have to do to make people believe that you trust in them, go with it. Because the trust will come, and your workers do deserve your trust, and they will earn it. They will earn it as long as they believe that they have it to start with. Okay, so let's talk about some places where you can start. And I can see there's quite a lot of chat in the room. So I will come to Galina in a minute, who I know is going to help us with some questions and answers. So with some questions. So these are things for you to think about. Positive feedback is nice, but we only change for the better when we get critical feedback. So how many of you, again, give me a thumbs up, yes, you go to maybe your line manager, or maybe a peer, or maybe a subordinate, and say, I just did a presentation, or you just observed me in that meeting, or I just performed something. Could you give me some feedback on that? And you're really looking forward to getting some feedback. And they say, oh, I thought you were really good. And you're like, yeah, okay, but what could I have improved on? Nothing. It was great. Okay, but is there something that I could do differently next time? No, it was really great. How does that feel? Seriously, how does it really feel? Now, on the surface, you might say, oh, it feels really nice, I'm great, you know, but how does it really feel? And do you go away from those conversations and actually change anything? I bet you don't, because you don't know what to do. What about when somebody says, well, actually, I thought that this could have been better. I thought that you might have wanted to talk less about this and more about this. Or I didn't like the way that you kept staring at somebody, or you didn't make eye contact, or actually, you know, you had that pen in your hand and you kept twiddling it the whole time and it was really distracting me. How does that feel? At first, you want to defend yourself and excuse those behaviors, because we all do. That's human nature. We want to go, what? Oh yeah, you're right. I've always got a pen in my hand. You're right. I do that. I know I do that. But actually, you're more likely to take that feedback on board. And guess what? That's how you improve. Next time, you're going to be better. So this is my challenge for you. The next time somebody asks you for feedback, don't give them the proverbial sandwich. Say, okay, this is how I think you could have done this better. And actually give them some critical feedback. Don't tear them apart. Don't be so harsh to them that you leave them in tears. Don't do that. But actually give them the critique that they're really looking for. Now, you might want to end on some positives, and I would suggest you probably would, but it is the critique. And when people get used to the fact that they are going to get critical feedback, actually they start to get used to it. They stop taking it personally and they actually value it. So in my team at Paradigm, we have really perfected this. Now, we have learned a way of doing it, and sometimes we'll make it a little bit lighthearted, but that feedback is in there. And it was really interesting. So last week we were away for 3 days. We were onboarding 7 new members to our team. And we did something that we always do with new members. We did a random presentation, as we call it. So we give them 3 random pictures, and they really are random. And we say, you've got 10 minutes to prepare a presentation and link the pictures. And we put them under that little bit of pressure. And what we're looking for is, what's their reaction? Do they recoil from it? Do they dive into it and have a bit of fun with it? Do they get nervous? All of those kind of things. And then what we do is we exercise some radical candor, and we give each other some feedback on that. And the content of the presentation doesn't matter, because most of the time it's gobbledygook. So we're not critiquing their technical ability or their technical skills. We're actually talking to them about the way they come across, the way that they present, and how they can improve. And when you do this initially with new starters, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I promise you, by the time you've done it 4 or 5 times as a team, and they've got to critique the CEO, and they've managed to critique the operations director and the founding director, everyone feels really comfortable with it. And if they've made Teresa cry, even better, they feel even more comfortable with it. But you get what I mean. So look for an opportunity to give that critical feedback and ask for it. And when you want that, make sure that you hang out for it and make sure people give you that. Where do you start as a leader? Never give a straight answer. So I'm not asking you to be a politician, but actually I love it when leaders answer a question with another question. And that the best question you can always ask is, I don't know, what do you think? So, so often as leaders, we feel under pressure to perform and have all of the answers. And it is so empowering when, if you shoot from the hip and the thing that comes out is, I don't know. Oh, for starters, they'll probably be taken aback because, hey, you're the leader, you're supposed to know this stuff, right? But actually what you do is you give them the opportunity to share what they think. And if Simon Sinek fan, and let's face it, who probably isn't, you know that the best leaders, they speak last. Listen to what other people think. Listen to what the people you trust think. How would they cope if you weren't there today to give them the answer? So straight from the hip, make it a habit. I don't know, what do you think? They will soon get to understand that they don't come to you with a question, they come to you with a solution. They say, this is the challenge, and these are the solutions that I think we could put in front of you. And you might want to help them choose between, but these are great things to do as a leader. I don't know, what do you think? Dare I say it, that in the worst case scenario, all you've done is given yourself 10 or 15 seconds to decide what you really do think the answer is. So if you're staring back at blank faces and they really have no answer, hey, you've just bought yourself 15 seconds to really think on your feet and come back with something else. But give it back to them and let them come up with the answers, or at least some suggestions. If you, and I know that there are a few people in the room who know me and know my work, and so you'll be very familiar with organizational drift, and even if you don't know me, you might be familiar, but there is always this gap. It is there always, the gap between work as imagined and work as done. It's called the drift. We all need to be mindful of work as imagined versus work as done. So what does it really look like to get the job done out here? Because if we sit in our ivory tower, whether that be the safety office or the boardroom, and convince ourselves that the procedures are great, the risk assessment's good, all the control measures are robust and in place, people are doing exactly what the procedure says, we should be really worried. We should be really worried. Okay, our workers do not necessarily work in accordance with procedures. And if you ever doubt that, all you've got to do is speak to your local trade union rep and find out, ask them, what does work to rule mean? Why is that such a powerful tool for trade unions? The reason work to rule is such a powerful tool is because when we work to rule, no work gets done because the procedures don't work. We're understaffed, we're under-resourced, there isn't a permit in place, the material isn't in the right place, we don't have lifting plans, and so on and so forth. That's the reality of work. So go out there and understand it, but be careful, don't judge it. So don't make a judgment before the trial. When you go out there and you see something and you think that's rule breaking, that's not what's in the procedure, that's not how I expect to see the job being done, instead of going straight for the gun, go for the pen and pencil and ask why, and understand the answers, because that is the difference between work as imagined and work as done. And if you want to create a psychologically safe environment, this is the foundation of it. Your people have to be able to tell you how they really get work done in your organization. Practice radical candor in a safe environment. You know, if you're wondering about radical candor, I mean, there is a book called Radical Candor out there, which you can obviously find and read. A great one a book to read is The Principles by Ray Dalio. So he was the founder of Bridgewater, you know, big investment organization in the States and globally. And Ray Dalio's organization is based on principles. And it's a powerful read. There's some great stuff in it. But when you really understand what radical candor is, that's going to help you frame it in your own organization, because in his words, and he's often quoted when, you know, side by side with this kind of phrase, it doesn't mean soft and fluffy and everyone, you know, feeling safe to talk up. It means if you don't speak up, that is a taboo. That is not acceptable. And actually, you would be judged harshly for not speaking up if it later transpired that you had information. So a great spidey sense of this is when you have an accident or an incident or an unwanted outcome, the first time you hear your people saying, I know what happened there, I know exactly what happened, or I know how they did that, or that's almost happened to me before. If you truly have a psychologically safe environment, the measure of that would be that those conversations are totally unacceptable. You do not speak up after the event. You speak up before the event. How do you do that? You talk about organizational drift. You identify the gap between work as imagined and work as done, and you work with your workforce to understand and address it. So as a leadership team, you know, this true psychological safety, as I said, it's an expectation. It's not just a, you know, it's not just a nice to have where people feel safe. You will speak up, you will share, you will shout if there is something that you are uncomfortable with or unhappy with, or if you have some business intelligence that we absolutely need to be aware of, you will speak up. Not speaking up, it's a taboo. It's totally unacceptable. And in fact, you could be punished for not speaking up if it later transpires that you had some information that could have prevented the thing from going wrong, or at the very least, reduce the consequences of the thing that went wrong. So understand this before you just kind of throw it out there that we want to create a psychologically safe environment. And that goes back to my initial point. Do you really? And what does that mean for you? It takes huge trust and respect to be this open, and therefore start small. So, you know, some of you will be familiar with this concept of red teaming. So you might have a system whereby, you know, you have a period during a meeting where you do something called red teaming. You can call it whatever you want, where we're going to critique this meeting. We're going to critique each other and our own performance in this meeting. And we're going to start this at the leadership table, and we're going to make it safe, and we're going to make it an expectation that we will critique each other and ourselves as a team. Are we successful as a team? Again, know your audience. So if you agree to do it as a leadership team, that's great. But as a leader, just because you go to your team and say, we're going to have a psychologically safe environment, and I want you to speak up and tell me everything and all of this great stuff, there will always be someone in your team or some people in your team who are never going to do it. It might be because of their culture. It might be because of their background. It might be because of their, you know, limiting personal beliefs. There's some real exploration to go on before you just do this. The ones who will are the ones who would anyway, whether you made a declaration or not. The people who are going to speak up when you say, hey, I want to know everything, they'll do it anyway. So really take the time to explore the people and know your audience. I said that I was going to ask you some questions. I really would love you to put this in the chat chat room, and I hope it's okay for me to ask this. I kind of ask it everywhere I go lately. How diverse are we as a safety community? How well represented is the LGBTQ community in the safety community? How well represented are ethnic minorities? How good representation do we have of, different religions, different backgrounds, different, ethnic minorities, nationalities, whatever it is? How well represented are these groups in the health and safety community, in your opinion? So I am really interested in your thoughts in the chat room on this, because you can help me learn. But my personal experience is not very well at all. And certainly in the organizations that I work with, again, that's my experience there as well. So how are we tackling that as a community if we're not attracting that diversity into our professionalism, into our field, our profession, sorry? What are we going to do about it? Because we're going to have to go outside of our profession to find that diverse thinking. So again, something that we're doing in my organization is we've just set up a diversity and inclusion advisory board. And we've actually gone out to those communities and said, we know that you're not health and safety professionals. We know that you're not psychologists. We need this diversity of thought. We need to understand our audience better. And you do represent our audience because you're all members of the workforce. So again, we talk a good talk about it. We talk a good job about a lot of things in our community, but how are we going out there and kind of walking the talk? So where does your diversity of thought come from? And that's a really good learning point for me, and maybe something for you to think about as well. Because in a psychologically safe environment, it's there. You have to have it. Otherwise, you're just hearing from people that sound and look like you, and you can get a bit fed up with an echo chamber. And I'm a great believer in, at the moment, I think that health and safety is a great echo chamber. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Agree the rules beforehand. Again, we talked about what does psychological safety look like, but if we're going to demonstrate and practice radical candor in our small little leadership group or in our little safety team, what does that look like? What are the rules? And sort of finally, as I say, try this new paradigm. That there's a good reason why my company has got this name. It's because we're trying to get people to come at these problems from this new paradigm. And our paradigm is that most employees in our organizations, they do have the best intentions. They're trying to do the right thing. We spend too much time thinking, these guys and girls, they're driving to work every morning thinking, how can I give my boss a bad day today? No, they're not. They're really not. Most of them want to go home with, 10 fingers and toes at the end of the day. We know through studies and research that the number of times when people truly violate, vandalism, theft, attacking somebody, those kind of true violations, they're minuscule in the workplace. They really are. And so why would we always go to look for the human to blame? Actually, we know that the organization and the systems and us as a leadership team, most of the time, we ultimately set people up to fail. So, if you're coming at all of your problems with this mindset, this paradigm, most employees have the best intentions and they're trying to do the right things. How different would your problem solving and your incident investigations be? Leaders often reinforce undesired standards and behaviors without even knowing it. Yeah, so accept that. You're a leader, you're fallible. You may have done this already. You may have done it today. Go back in tomorrow and say, hang on a minute. That thing we celebrated yesterday. Let's just dig into this a little bit deeper and understand, how did we achieve that? Organizational weaknesses and latent conditions, they set people up to fail, as we've already kind of talked about. And this hindsight bias, this, I know what happened there, or this fortune telling almost, I think I can fit the pieces together. So the investigation's done before we even go out there and interview the first witness. That sets us all up to fail, including the workers. And then when we do solve these problems and we put corrective actions in place, anything that's aimed at fixing the worker, it's not going to prevent it happening again, because you can only fix a worker one at a time. You fix the system once and it's done. So, you know, spend the money, spend the time, you know, spend the energy on fixing the system. What is fixing the worker? Rewriting the procedure, sending them back to, you know, how to not to be an idiot training school, or the most famous one, let's not just send that one forklift truck driver back to training school, let's send all of them. You know, let's spend thousands of pounds teaching people stuff that they really already do know. We just don't give them the time to move stuff around properly, and we may not give them the right tools to drive it, you know, all those things. Don't send people back to training school. That's fixing the worker. Don't, you know, punish, name, shame, blame, retrain. You know, I've seen examples where, you know, something really good will happen, or, you know, a team, they'll have an incident and they'll be open to talk about it. And then the first thing that the organization does is say, great, let's make a film, let's make a movie, and shame them in front of an even wider audience. Please don't do it to your workers. They don't like it. It's not good. It's not a good way to learn. You know, if they've had the courage to come and share with you what really happened, don't put it on a video. Don't kind of get them up in the canteen and give them a big reward for it. It really, you know, it prevents other people from speaking up in the future, because they don't want to have the spotlight on them. And human error is another form of business risk, which we can predict and mitigate. We've talked about, you know, making yourself vulnerable, share your why, again, hone your storytelling skills. So when you're sharing your story with your workforce, think about who told the story, why was it memorable to you, what did you take away from it, how have you used it? Because storytelling is how we learn as individuals and as organizations, and your people will value that. They value the time that they get from you, and they understand that you've given them a little piece of you, which is really important. Okay, so in summary, I apologize that I've overrun. In summary, agree what psychological safety means for you and your organization, and spell it out. Tell people what this means for you. Don't worry about what it means on the poster. Don't worry about what it means in the dictionary. What does it mean for you in your organization? Why do you want it? And how will you measure it? Yeah. And again, as part of that why you want it, just stop and think, do we really want it? And what are we going to do? How are we going to handle the flood if it's really successful? Psychological safety starts with leaders, and leaders need to be taught how to have these conversations and how to lead people. Look out for people reverting to their personal strengths when the pressure is on. Kind of pull them back and say, hey, you're a leader. You're not a doer or a fixer. You're the leader. You lead the people who do the doing and the fixing. So, you know, get back into your line and do your job. And again, start small. Practice radical candor as a leadership team first, before you even think about taking it out onto the shop floor. And most importantly, tell your story. And that's where it all really does start from. And again, sorry, finally, trust must be theirs to lose. You know, give your trust willingly and allow them to kind of lose it rather than try to earn it from you. Okay, sorry, Alan, I'm sorry.
Nice. Can I say, no, it's not a problem, Teresa. It's absolutely fascinating and very, very interesting. And I think that's reflected with a number of questions we've got. So, Galina, if you'd like to throw some of the questions at Teresa and we'll get her response and answers, please. We may not have time for all the questions. So if we haven't, I'll put my email address up there for any remaining questions. Can you please send your questions to me? And I'll maybe forward them. Well, I'll forward them across to Teresa, and hopefully she'll be able to get back to us with that. If that's okay, Teresa.
You're welcome to put my email address up there as well if you want, if anyone, you know, wants to come direct as well. So yeah, not a problem at all. I'll do that, definitely.
Oh, thank you very much. So over to you then, Galina, with the questions, please.
Right. Yeah. Apart from questions, also I wanted to notice that the chat is very active, which means that the topic is very relevant to everybody. So I think it's great to see that people are sharing their views and opinions and discussions. So I think this is really good. Right. The first question would be, how do you prepare senior managers to readily accept the inevitable implied criticism from employees who start to speak up?
Yeah, by doing it yourselves as a leadership team, that has to be the starting point, so that you get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's this thing about as humans, we're not learning, we're not stretching ourselves if we still feel comfortable. So as a leadership team, agree to do this together, agree that everyone will take part, and start small. Start with that. Okay, we're going to do a red teaming session and we're only going to critique each other for the next 10 minutes. And only by critiquing will we improve. So make it a requirement to do it at the leadership level so that people get to feel comfortable with the discomfort. And then they can start, once you're okay with it and you can handle it and you realize it's not actually going to break you, it's not quite as scary.
Right, thank you. The next question, other than Amy Edmondson, who would you recommend reading with regards to psychological safety?
Okay, so there's a book by Tim Clark, which is, it talks about 4 stages of psychological safety. I think it's a great read, but read with caution, because I think when I read that book, again, what I recognized was I'd been on a number of courses where people said, oh, there's these 4 stages of psychological safety. And I was like, really? There's just 4 steps for a company to achieve this? That's not what it says. The 4 stages of psychological safety, according to Tim, are that, at any point in time, any one of your members of, any member of your team can be at a different stage in those 4 steps. And they can move between them. They can move back and forth. So read with that caveat from me, but Tim Clark's book is great. And, basically anything at all, anything that you can get your hands on by Brené Brown, just read and read and read. Read Brené Brown, everything she's ever written. I'm just a huge fan, and I can't recommend her work enough. And that is about courage and vulnerability. And shame, interestingly enough, but it's really great to read.
Thank you. The next question is, I like the point leaders need to show vulnerability. What sort of response do you get from putting this point across? As my experience is that it's the last thing they want to do. I do think it's a positive quality though.
Totally. And it's scary, isn't it? Because, as a leader, oh, thanks, Phil. Yeah, Brené Brown does have a special on Netflix. You're right. And she's got a few TED Talks. I think you're right. It's a scary thought because we are asking leaders to go out there and kind of, just almost kind of bare their soul. But when you start doing it, it's not about going out there and saying like, so I guess where I want to come from is we all suffer from imposter syndrome, okay, or the majority of us do. It's not about going out there. It's not the same as the imposter syndrome where you have to go out there and say, yeah, I don't actually know what I'm doing. I'm a really rubbish leader and I'm just waiting for somebody to find out. It's not that, okay? What we're trying to do is get you to kind of share a piece of yourself with people. Most of us, particularly health and safety people, we didn't grow up, and forgive me if any of you did, we didn't get to the age of 5 and start school and go, oh my God, when I leave school, I want to be a health and safety manager. Oh my God. And the harder the industry that I'm a health and safety manager in, the better. If it's process safety, great. Very few of us kind of grew up thinking that we want to be a safety professional. We fall into it typically, and we fall into it, we might say at first because, well, that's just where I ended up. But actually, when you really dig deep, there's a passion there, there's a drive, there's a reason why you do this job, because not everybody wants to do it and not everybody can do it. So why are you in this job? What does it mean to you? What happens to you when you learn about, an experience of lack of safety, an accident, an incident? What is it that's driving you to do? Who was the person that you saw get hurt or the person you knew who got treated badly, or, you know, God forbid, you know, died through asbestosis. What is it that really is getting you out of bed in the morning to come and do this kind of sometimes thankless job? Start sharing that. Start there and grow from there. And teach your leaders to do the same. Give them workshops. We get great opportunities as safety teams to, you know, have workshops with operational leaders and do some tours with them. So get their ear. Just start talking to them. You know, what's your story? Why do you do the job you do? Get them to share with you, and then feed back to them and say, you know, that was such a powerful story. Have you ever shared that with your team? Because I think it would be amazing if you did. There you go. Great starter.
Thank you. By the way, if there will be some background noise when I'm reading the questions, I apologize. Storm's kicking in and I'm right next to the window.
No.
So, right, the next question is, what are the best measures without using the absence of safety?
Sorry, can you just repeat that again, Galina?
What are the best measures without using the absence of safety?
Yeah, so again, great question. And yeah, like the golden chalice, isn't it? We're all looking for this. For us, it's about looking at the inputs. So, you know, definitely in terms of when we look at jobs, when we go out and we observe tasks and activities, we really do it in quite a detailed way. So almost like a human factors type task analysis, because we're really looking for the difference between work as imagined and work as done. And you have to really observe very closely, and you have to see the whole task in order to determine that. And while that activity is being done, you have to question, you know, you have to say, tell me what you're thinking, because very often they're not talking while they're doing the job. So observing tasks in a different way gives you different intelligence about how work is done out there. And then what you can learn from that, from those really good, robust observations, is which control measures, A, are in your risk assessment and which ones aren't, but the workers are, you know, self-selecting to use them. So where are your workers going above and beyond your risk mitigation? And what controls that you've got in your risk management processes are effective, that are actually working. So again, start everything small. Just go out there and look at some, you know, pick 2 high risk activities, either, you know, high risk, infrequently performed, or maybe low risk, but frequently performed. Go and observe 2 and really break them down, understand how they get them done, and then compare, literally sit and compare them to the risk assessment. If you don't have a risk assessment, there's your problem. That start there and say, which of these control measures are actually effective and working? And when you've established that, you can then go back, again, I always go back to first principles. So where else in our operation do we have that or similar risks? And are we applying the same control measures there? So you start to get an understanding of how robust your control measures are and how commonly applied they are by your workers. So that's a great starting point for measuring the presence of capacity to fail safely. So, you know, that's how it's very often worded these days. How do you measure the presence of safety? You've got to understand the controls, and you've got to go and see if they're actually effective and if they're being implemented.
Thank you. The next question is, I found that by showing a little weakness and offering others to feel valued by helping makes for a better workplace. Do you agree?
I totally agree. Congratulations, whoever that is, amazing. Just teach everyone else that you work with to do exactly the same. I love, there's nothing I love more, and very often it's true, you know, I go out and I'm a bit dull. I don't have to understand the job. So I go out there and I can ask the most stupid questions. And, you know, because I have to respect the person who's doing the job, because I have to work off an assumption that he or she is an expert at her job or his job. Therefore, who better to learn from than that individual? So I ask so many questions. And when you ask questions without judgment and, you know, without knowing the answers yourself, people love to talk about what they do. There's still pride. We say there's no pride in the workforce anymore. Yeah, there is. Go to any power station, go to any railway job, go to any construction site. Yes, there is great pride out there. We just don't see it as leaders because we don't ask the questions and we don't give our people time to share it with us. Go and look for the pride, go and ask the questions and let your people to you.
Thank you. In an unbalanced organization, do we not think KPI rules over everything?
Look at the leaders, look to the leadership team. What are the leaders reinforcing? What are they behaving? You know, what behaviors are they driving? If, you know, and really just kind of pull the thread on these KPIs, you know, so when you next sit down with your safety dashboard or your finance dashboard or whatever it is you're looking at in terms of KPIs, pull the thread and, you know, just say, why is this measure important to us? And how is it getting measured? And how do we respond as leaders when we don't hit the measure? Or more worryingly, has this measure just been green for the last year or 2 years and we've never questioned why it's always green? And is that realistic for it to always be green? Is it realistic that in a heavy industrial area or you know, a construction site, we've had no accidents and incidents? There's nothing in the accident book, really? But all the plaster's gone out of the first aid box. Go figure. You know, so pull threads on things and ask different questions. But, you know, and I know sometimes that this is beyond our control, particularly when we work in great big corporations. But the great thing to do as a leadership team, if it's within your gift, is to kind of just like do away with everything for a month and see what happens. And really understand at the end of that month, sit down and say, okay, how have we performed as a business in our judgment as the leadership team? And how are we making that judgment? What data, what have we looked at? What have we heard? What have we referred to be able to make that judgment? Because we're very rarely wrong. Those are the real KPIs. Those are the things that are telling you whether you're performing or not. So whatever it is that you use as a leadership team to measure success or failure, those are the real KPIs that matter. And the rest are probably just something that you've got somebody doing to prove that they're worth their salary.
Thank you. Do we have time for some more questions, Alan?
I think probably as time's pushing on, I would say at this point, no, we haven't really. So, and anybody with any questions, I did put in the chat function there my email address if you want to forward them to me, and also Teresa's, as she kindly said that you can email her direct. So I'll just like to say thank you very much to everybody for your questions. I think we could be here all night, which is great because it just shows how interesting the presentation's been, both with the length of time that people have stayed engaged and with the question sets that are there. So on that note, I'd say, right, can I say a massive, massive thank you, Teresa, for a fantastic presentation. I just wish you'd been my boss for many, many years before I worked for myself. Lots to be learned there, so great. And can I just remind the rest of our members, please don't forget our face-to-face. There will also be a short survey sent out tomorrow. It is important that you give us this feedback because we can learn from that. And that's obviously part of Teresa's comments as well in her presentation tonight. And we do learn from it, I believe we do. So please do that and take care. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our face-to-face meeting. So thanks very much, everybody, and have a good night.